I'm Shanna Martin, host of the Tech Tools for Teachers podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to Black, Brown, and Bilingual, where our mission is to unite the Black and Brown communities through education, storytelling, and community engagement.
The vision of Black, Brown, and Bilingual is to be part of creating a world in which Black and Brown identities are affirmed, bilingualism and biculturalism are nurtured, and equity is the driving force behind all that we do. Thank you for joining us again today. I am Lisette Jacobson, and I am one of your hosts.
And I'm Maurice McDavid. I'm your other host.
All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Black, Brown, and Bilingual. Folks, today is actually a first. You have just me hosting today, but we are so excited to have in our guest today. We're hoping everything is well with Lisette. No worries. She's not in danger, nothing, but just had some come up. So we're here today with Sandy Cristobal. Sandy is a bilingual educator and administrator. And Sandy shared with us that she came to the U.S. with her family when she was 7 years old. Her trajectory as a newcomer and English learner led her to pursue education and become a teacher and now administrator. She's taught kindergarten, she's taught Spanish as a foreign language, and ESL. Sandy and her family are from Bolivia. She is a proud Latina administrator, and she strives to bring light to positivity and gratitude in the workplace and grow as a leader in everyone she encounters. So, Sandy, welcome in. Thank you so much for joining us today on Black, Brown, and Bilingual.
Thank you so much for having me. Just hearing that just again brings so much pride, and it makes me think about, oh my gosh, that is where I came from. You need those moments, right, to remind yourself how far you've gotten.
Absolutely. Let's start there, Sandy, if you don't mind. Tell us just a little bit about kind of what that process was like for you. What are some of those most prominent memories for you when you think about arriving here in the United States as a 7-year-old little girl?
It's funny because I actually remember some of those things. So my family and I came here. My parents got a scholarship to study here, to get their master's degree here. So my story is a little different than some other stories. And what makes it really interesting was that we came into the U.S. thinking my parents were just gonna be here for a little bit until they got their master's and then go back, and my parents pursued their careers. But we ended up staying, because my family, my dad got a job, and so that meant that now we had to be getting more involved into the community and make this our home. And when I was 7 years old, the only English phrase I knew was "I love you," and that was thanks to Barney. Yeah, shout out to Barney.
El Dinosaurio Morado. Yes.
So I know, I love you, because I remember I had a stuffed Barney animal. You squeezed the hand and it said, "I love you." And so those were the only 3 words I knew in English. And so coming into an American education system was so shocking for me. But I remember my first American teacher, her name was Miss Larson till this day. See the impact of good quality teachers, right? Miss Larson, to me, was my saving grace. She just made me feel like I belonged there. And she made me feel that that she was the one she was chosen to make me feel at home. And Ironically, that's how I was intrigued of becoming an educator because of Miss Larson, the way she made me feel. I wanted to make other students feel that way. So as I was learning English, I started to realize that I had a lot of differences and a lot of similarities, but more differences than most of my classmates. Learning English was tough for me. I had my first ESL teacher was not very kind. She would always, it's like the drill. She drilled me on a lot of vocab, and I remember a specific story about that was there was a flashcard that she showed me one day and it was a picture of a necklace, and for some reason I couldn't say that. I would always say Nicholas, Nicholas, and she did the typical no, not glass, not glass, as if I couldn't hear, right? And so that also, as I grew older, I remember that experience. So I had a little bit of both words growing up, and having someone like Miss Larson and having someone like this ESL teacher made me really pursue my interest in education. But it was difficult because as my parents began their trajectory of settling, I didn't have access to the same things that my classmates had. And so that was eye-opening to me, even as a 7-year-old.
Yeah, so I think you've kind of hit on this a little bit already, right? But obviously that trajectory towards becoming an educator was impacted by this. But it also sounds like, right, you were in a home where education was very much so valued.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit kind of about your parents' perspective on education and maybe how that influenced kind of where you are today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I come from the country of Bolivia, and it all stems from culture. So in Bolivia, it's free education, free college, free universities for everyone. So the culture in Bolivia is that you go to school no matter what. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you come from. It doesn't matter who your parents are. Education is free for all. So everybody, it's part of the culture. Everybody goes. So my parents growing up in that system and that culture, education was something that you didn't think twice about it. And there was no excuse, there was no second guessing, you just did it. And so my parents, both of them had their master's degree by the time I was already born. And so it was just a natural thing for them because of the culture that they grew up in. And so, of course, my parents, growing up as a child and seeing them appreciate reading and appreciate asking questions about different things that were happening in politics and being engaged with their community and listening to different speakers and watching documentaries played a big role in me. And my father, one of the things he told me, he said, "Now you have to get a higher degree than me and your mom ever had." So I have my master's now. So and my dad is no longer with us, but I always think about him, like he if he was here, he'd be like, "Come on, get your PhD."
Yep, exactly. What's next? What's next, Sandy? Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, it was grained in our culture. And so it was just what everybody, so not even, so if you go to Bolivia now, you may see people working on the streets, but they have 2 or 3 degrees just because it's free. So you may see some carpenters that are also doctors, some doctors that are also lawyers, and so it's really neat. So it was part of my culture.
That's incredible. That's really neat. Just that piece. Particularly, that was something I did not know about Bolivia. So I'm definitely learning something already. Obviously, you then made a decision through probably, it sounds like, seeing both really great teachers and maybe seeing also, right, because sometimes we learn from what we don't want to do when we get into that role. So you made a decision to become an educator. What was that process like for you? Did you always think, okay, I'm going to be an ESL teacher in particular, or I'm going to teach bilingual? What was that process like for you?
So once I got to college, I knew I wanted to pursue education just because of Miss Larson's impact in my life. And like you said yourself, like not wanting anyone else to feel the way I did with my ESL teacher. But I didn't go into bilingual education at first. So I thought, well, what am I passionate about? What would I like students to learn? What can I bring to the table? And I went down the foreign language track. So my goal was to be a Spanish as a foreign language teacher, and teach monolingual students Spanish. And I thought, I'm from Bolivia, it's a little bit different intake on, perspective. And I wanted to do that. So that's where I got all my practicums. My student teachings were all in foreign language. But as soon as I graduated, I started as a part-time foreign language teacher at the time. Now thinking back, those jobs were so scarce. So thankfully I landed just a part-time Spanish as a foreign language teacher in middle school. And the principal in the building that I was at, he said, "Hey, Sandy, you're obviously fluent. Have you considered getting your bilingual endorsement?" And so I had heard about that. And I said, yeah, but my goal at the time was like, I was hoping he was going to say, "Hey, Sandy, now you can be a full-time Spanish foreign language teacher." Because he said to me, we would like for you to be full-time, but right now there's a need for bilingual ESL. And so, of course, when he approached me, my first reaction was, "Oh, okay, well." And then I thought about that ESL teacher that I had when I was 7. I was like, I don't want to be like her. What if I turn out to be like that? Because those are like the memories that you have, right? But Miss Larson, I thought I could recreate that as a Spanish as a foreign language teacher. And I was so afraid to like go into that ESL world because I didn't want anyone, I didn't want to impact a student in the way I did. But long story short, I wanted full time. So I said, let me go get this endorsement. And then that principal had a lot of trust in me. And then I became full-time ESL teacher. And I worked with a lot of friends from Vietnam and from the Middle East. And then my love completely transformed from foreign language to EL in the emerging bilinguals and the English learners. And so then I thought, okay, now this is my jam because these kids share the similar story that I do. These kids needs an advocate for them. I know what they're going through. I know what their parents are thinking.
Yeah.
Why they're confused. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm able to serve differently. And so then the following year, then I wanted to pursue something more full-time in that role.
Excellent. Yeah, so you've kind of hit on this a little bit. Obviously, our whole podcast is Black, Brown, and Bilingüe. Yo era un maestro de la clase de español también. But I felt like I could do that because I was coming into it as someone who had learned Spanish, right? So that was my connection. I'd tell the kids, like, look, I sat in your seat and I learned Spanish like you learned Spanish.
I can do it.
Right, exactly. But I think that there's something powerful, right, about what you said, and that is that your experience, you have that shared experience with, even those students were from the Middle East or from Vietnam or from wherever they may be, you've arrived in this place that doesn't speak the language you have always spoken. All of a sudden, not everybody looks maybe like you look, and there's just kind of this culture shock piece. What were some of the major differences, for anybody listening who maybe is in a similar position? What were some of the major differences between teaching that Spanish as a foreign language and kind of more of that ESL role?
I guess one of the main differences that I remember is that students that were learning English as a second language, they came with so many much more skills that were so much more visible than in a foreign language class. In a foreign language class, we were all kind of on the same level. We're all learning together. We're learning, in my case, Spanish. We were all learning to conjugate verbs. But then with the EL kids, with the English learners, I realized that they came with so many other more skills that they were able to bring out as soon as they were acquiring the language. As a teacher, it took a lot more for me to plan my lessons more strategically than as a Spanish as a foreign language teacher. You want to do some fun activities with the language, hands-on learning with Spanish, but with EL, it was like, okay, how can I look at my standards, but not incorporate this to the real world? And because now they're going to have to navigate it when they leave my room, and just taking all their skills, and some of them were at different levels, right? So you had some students that maybe had that social English, and some students that had nothing yet, and then some that were able to read at a primary grade, and so being able to teach them all and involve their interest was also something, although challenging, was very rewarding for me. And then being able to collaborate with their teachers, because as a Spanish as a foreign language teacher, we had our department, I had the French teacher, the German teacher, and we were like, okay, how the give me some ideas about how I can teach this verb, or do you have any oracy activities? But on the EL world and the ESL world, my conversations were so different. We're like, did you know that this student is working after school? Do you know that this student is feeling down because their mother or their cousins haven't come to this side of from Mexico, or this student is having anxiety because you keep calling them and they want to participate but they don't know how. And so those were so I saw that advocacy more in my role as an ESL teacher, and just being able to, and then the love for the kids was just different, right? Because they just became like, these are my babies, these are my kids, I want to protect them. So I think those were some of the differences that I saw between the two.
Awesome. So this is actually a great way to kind of transition here just a little bit, because you talked about that collaborating with other teachers, that ability to be an advocate even, right, for some of your students. And I think that both of those are really key roles in the job of an administrator. So not everybody who becomes a teacher obviously becomes an administrator. How did you get to that place where you said, okay, I am ready to make this jump now from being a leader in the classroom of students to now having an official building leadership role? I'm sure you had leadership roles prior, right, to becoming an official administrator. So can you talk a little bit about just what that journey was like for you from the classroom to building level administration?
Sure. Well, I was really vocal when it came to advocating for my students, specifically my ESL students. And then I had the privilege to push it into a lot of gen ed classrooms. So I would see some things that teachers could just tweak to make their classrooms more inviting to our English learners. And I was able to just build relationships with a lot of teachers. So a lot of teachers started to come to me for advice, or just for some feedback on, hey, I know you're going to come into my classroom, you're pushing in. I'm going to try doing TPR. Can you see if I did it correctly? I know you talked about that at the staff meeting or whatnot. And so I started building relationships with my colleagues and became that trusted colleague. And I think my principal started to see that. And so the principal at the time, during one of my formal observations, and then my summative, said to me, have you, I'm noticing that you are becoming a natural leader. You ask a lot of good questions. You're always volunteering to do X, Y, and Z. It seems like a lot of the teachers you work with trust you. Have you considered getting your admin degree? And I laughed, right? Because I was like, no, that's going to the dark side. I don't want to go to the dark side.
Right, the dark side. Welcome.
Yeah. And so I took it as like a compliment, but in the back of my mind was like, no, that's not for me. And so, but as the years went on, I kept getting more leadership opportunities within my school district, whether it be being part of the building leadership team, being the lead for my EL team. And so that conversation came up again with my principal, and I just want to thank her. She is the one that really pushed me to do it. And then I thought, why not? I need a master's degree. My parents, they expect for me to get a master's degree anyway. I'm Bolivian. I got to do it. We'll see. I'll just get it just to get it. But going through that program was very transforming, because you learn a lot of things that you don't think about. You learn about so much about the school and the community and law and policy, and then I was like, okay, like this is something that is really becoming a passion of mine, is to really being able to learn about how schools work. And also that instructional leadership was, knocking at my door. And so that's what really intrigued me into then pursuing it. So as soon as I graduated, I thought, let me see, let me try and see what happens. And that's what got me to where I'm at. Was those things, is knowing that my influence could go only to certain people or certain rooms, but with my building admin degree, my influence can grow a little bit more.
Yes, yeah, I love that. That is definitely a major part of my story as well, right? Thinking about, okay, I can impact this classroom, or even, I was a middle school teacher, so I can impact this 100 and some students that I see each day, or I can impact, teachers who then are impacting students.
Right.
So with that in mind, we've follow you on the Twitter,
Twitter
and
world.
yes, exactly. And so, we know that there are some things, or kind of these 5 tips that you have developed, that really focus on how educators can make a positive change, positive impact on their environment, right? Which is key when you talk about like being a building leader, right? Being an administrator. What does that really look like? And so I want to just hear from you a little bit about kind of how you got to these 5. What does it look like for you to live these 5? And for our listeners, again, we will, share some of these out. We'll post this up on our page. But, Sandy, you've talked about having a heart of gratitude, number 1. Number 2, listen, but don't always engage, which I got to tell you, I love that. That sounds a lot like something we try to practice, which is having that replacing judgment with curiosity, right? So I don't have to engage with you. I can even hear you without necessarily having to agree or disagree.
Absolutely.
Be the light, walk in confidence, and then don't compromise your beliefs or values about your students. And so I love all of those. Jump in whichever one. Maybe, obviously having a heart of gratitude is number 1, if you want to start there.
Yeah, no, I, just through my 10 plus years of education, these are some things that I picked up on what makes a teacher or an educator happy. Because I was struggling, there was times where I was doubting. I think we all have those doubts, right? Am I meant for this? Do I belong here? And so I had to check myself, check my heart, and just get grounded. And over my interaction with so many administrators, so many educators, so many families, these are the 5 things that I noticed, that the qualities of people that are that have a positive change into their building environment and workplace. So the first one is have a heart of gratitude. And so this is rooted in science. I don't think we talk about this enough, but when we are grateful, we release serotonin, which activates our brain to produce dopamine. And dopamine is what makes us feel happier and healthier. And so, and especially in our field, this, like we can become so caught up with what is happening here, what's happening there, why this, why that, and not to say those things are not true. But we have to shift our mentality to have a heart of gratitude, and that means appreciate the things that you are happy about, appreciate the things that you have control over. And even the fact that I think about this all the time, when we get newcomers, it's a challenge for our teachers, but the fact that we have the opportunity to connect with someone outside of our culture, to connect with someone that can bring so much to the table, and to help us see the world a different way, that's something that we should be grateful for, right? And so I've been thinking a lot about how do I start my day so that I can ground myself into being that person that I want to be. And so it starts with gratitude. So as an administrator, what that looks like for me is really acknowledging my gratitude for my staff. They go above and beyond. And as I've grown as an administrator, I realized that the only times that I would say something, acknowledge them, was like at staff meetings, or when I was talking to the board, or maybe when I was talking about them. But I realized that I wasn't giving things specifically to the individual or for specific things that our teachers and educators were doing.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that was a changer for the building.
Awesome.
Because teachers want to feel, they want to feel appreciated. And then when you feel gratitude for someone, that just makes you happier. So one of my tips is have a heart of gratitude. Maybe think about personally, I be thankful for the family you have, if for the health you have, for the opportunity to serve the students that we do have. And as an administrator, I'm so thankful for the staff that do go above and beyond every day. And so we try to do things to help our staff to practice this. And it's even like gratitude letters, shout outs. We've incorporated shout outs into our morning announcements. We've done gratitude letters and notes. And so when a person receives that, and sometimes it blows my mind, it's just ink and paper, but what it does that for someone, and what it does that for the one that's giving, is truly transformational. And so when your staff becomes more grateful, they become more happier. When you become more grateful, you're going to see a change even in the way that you see life.
Man, you came on dropping straight philosophy, Sandy. I appreciate it. I got to tell you, as I mentioned, I'm snooping around your Twitter page and just looking through some different things. And I noticed in your signature, you have Proverbs 11:2 in the signature. So I had to look it up. And I think it speaks very well to what you're talking about here. When pride cometh, then cometh shame, but with the lowly is wisdom, right? Mm-hmm. And this idea of this humility, being humble enough to say thank you to somebody, being humble enough to recognize, right, like, yo, you are bringing something that I could not bring.
Absolutely.
I think is incredibly beautiful. So I do think sometimes, right, sometimes people hear humility and they think that means you can't also be confident or you can't also shine. So for you, how do you match both remaining humble while at the same time, you said be the light, walk in confidence? How do those things mesh with you so that way our listeners can walk away saying, oh, I can both remain humble and also shine, bright like a diamond? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think I saw something on social media that they like with someone like with the humble beast. I was like, I like that. No, but you're right. When we talk about walking in confidence, to me, what that looks like is acknowledging that I am not where I want to be. I may not be the administrator that I want to be, but I'm going to get there. Having that growth mindset. We tell our kids that all the time, right? But we have to remind ourselves. So like when you are in the moment where you're starting to feel, how do I maneuver the situation? Was I meant for this? We got to remind ourselves, you got the job. like, you got the job. Like, I have to tell myself, like, I went through how many rounds of interviews, I made it. I know I have what it takes.
Right.
But it's different than being prideful. I think walking in confidence is having that growth mindset and being vulnerable at the same time so that others can see, okay, that's what that means. And then getting rid of that negative self-talk. We are so hard with ourselves, right? We are so hard with ourselves. We would never want our kids to talk the way sometimes we talk to ourselves. And then lately, one thing that I've been incorporating is positive affirmations, right? There's times where I have to go into meetings or make phone calls, like, when I'm just like, I don't want to do this. And I have to tell myself, okay, I have the tools that I need. I'm a professional. I'm going to articulate this well. I know that this child deserves my confidence in this area. And that makes me walk in confidence. And then being the light, just talk a little bit about that one too, is make sure that you admit and you apologize when we've made mistakes. Is what's going to make you be the light, especially in our field. Sometimes we get a little big-headed, and I say that with all respect, right? We think we know it all, or we're the experts of this, we're the experts of that. But one of the ways that people are going to be like, wow, that person is different, or he or she's different, is when we learn to admit and apologize when we made a mistake. And when we affirm others that what they do matters, and when we appreciate the work that they've done, when we advocate for what we think is right. And so I think that, like, being the light, walking in confidence, all of those things will make your humbleness stand out.
There we go. So have you ever heard the it's a quote that's often attributed to Nelson Mandela. I don't know if it was actually him that said it, right, but that talks about the idea that we really don't do anybody a favor by hiding our light, right?
Yes.
But that instead, by letting our light shine, we give permission to other people to also shine, right? And education it's an interesting field in that sometimes we you said big-headed. I would even argue competitive, right? Like where we feel like if I'm not ahead of the game, if I'm not, I got to try to compete with the person next door, instead of recognizing we're really all doing the same difficult job trying to get it done, right? So when I see you shine, rather than saying, man, I wish I was shining like that, saying, ooh, how did she shine like that? Well, how can we connect? We can shine together. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Yeah, I do think, man, so I really appreciate that, because I think it's something that we definitely need to continue to work on. Let's jump back then to your number 2, which was listen, but don't always engage. Man, if the last, I don't know, I guess 10 years of politics have taught us anything, is that I don't have the energy to engage in every conversation. What do you mean when you say listen, but don't always engage?
I think sometimes we're so quick to respond, and that has gotten a lot of people in trouble, right? Especially with our rights, right? With our culture, with the way we're in and getting canceled and all of that. But listening is an art. I think sometimes we think that leaders or people of influence or have to be the ones always speaking and always, managing the energy, or being the person that brings up all the talk in the room. But sometimes it's an art to listen, because you discover so much about people, and you discover what their values are, what they are, what are some things that they dislike, that they like, or some of their values, and then you can align yourself or say, I'm different. But you don't always have to engage. There's a time and place. Just like how you mentioned before, there's so much going on now in the education world. We should be aware of these topics. We should, right? It's our jobs to acknowledge what is changing. And then the way to engage is when you feel that when your voice is going to make a difference. But if you're going to voice just because you want to voice and rant and vent and bring someone down, and then that's going to discredit these other things that we've just spoken about, right? You know, you saw the Proverbs citation. There's another Proverbs that I like. It's from Proverbs 22:1. It says, a good name is more desirable than great riches, and to be esteemed is better than silver and gold. And so sometimes when we talk too much, we lose that good name, right?
And you preaching right now. You listen, be quiet, be still, be still. Yeah.
It's gonna help. It's just gonna help you grow as a person. There's a time and place. You know, I am all about advocating. But when it's not your turn, stay still. Your time will come. You don't have to have an opinion about X, Y, and Z. And especially in our workplace, you know, rumors and gossip. Oh boy. That is something that can affect the school climate, can change the school climate. And so we have to make a decision. Do I want to be part of this contributing potential, the toxic environment that is brewing? Or do I want to just say, listen, maybe don't engage, and then you be the light somewhere else? And guess what? Others are going to follow you. So you have that choice. But this is one that I always have to check myself into, because, you know, as administrators, there's so much happening, right, that we have to make decisions about. And I got my opinions on a lot of things, but I also know when is my time to say something or not.
¿Te gusta nuestro contenido? Síguenos en YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok y Facebook.
What she said. You know, so I'm pretty open about my faith. I serve as an assistant pastor at the church I grew up in, and
awesome.
One of the things that I'm thinking about as you're speaking is that ability to take off the armor is what we talk about a lot, you know, scripturally, is that even the greatest warriors took off the armor every once in a while, right? So there's a danger, right? Because King David was not engaged when he should have been engaged, he ends up with Bathsheba, right? But there's also the danger of engaging when you shouldn't be. So I was just reading in Second Chronicles, and this king goes out and fights this battle when he's not supposed to be fighting the battle. He ends up getting hit with the arrow and dies, right? So I think ultimately, I think of, right, in the New Testament, there's this scene where you find Jesus in the boat asleep, and there's a storm going on.
Yeah.
And the folk are like, hey, Lord, don't you care that we perish? You know, his disciples are like, hey, we out here struggling and you in here resting. But I think it well represents this idea that you have to pull out of the battle every once in a while. You have to rest. To give your full self, to give your full energy, means you can engage in everything.
Absolutely.
And
so you were not
called,
maybe we were not even called to fight all the fights in the world.
Right. I was thinking about this recently because I have not, earlier in my life, in my 20s, I made it a habit of every time there was a police-involved shooting of an unarmed person of color, I was on Facebook keyboard worrying all day.
Yeah.
That's exhausting. That's exhausting. You know, because what's really exhausting is you see some people who you care about, you see their true color. You see people who are like, hold on, we were just at a church service together, and now all of a sudden you out here dogging. So it was exhausting. And one of the things I discovered was, I'm not changing anybody's mind. If I engage in this on Facebook, I'm not getting the job done. So now instead, I chair our police review board for the city of DeKalb.
Okay.
So in my local community, if something happens and the police ain't acting right, it comes before me, and I get a chance to review the footage. And as a board, we get a chance to make that decision about whether or not there needs to be punishment. That's a time where I can engage. And so I love this one. This one is really hitting home for me. I appreciate these, Sandy.
No,
Just
absolutely.
the thought that you've put into it. But let's jump to this last one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't compromise your beliefs or values about your students.
Yeah.
Let me
When you
ask
say that,
you.
that sounds so good.
Yeah, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Where does that compromise, or that push to compromise, where does that come from in most cases? What have you seen kind of in your experience as an educator?
Sometimes so many cooks in the kitchen, honestly. That's the first thing that comes to my mind. Like I think about, when when there's a struggling student, everybody thinks their service is the right medicine, or it's like the solution to everything that they got going on. If
I got
only
that going on in my building right now. Yo, I'm telling you. Yes.
yes. And so I've seen so many times where some of my educators, they'll just say, I don't, I'm too, you like, I just fine, I don't want to disagree with so and so, fine, do take that struggling learner, do this with them. But when they know that that's not what they need, or when they know that their service also matters, or their contribution will only make that student even stronger in that area of weakness. And so we have to remind ourselves, like, what that passion that you have, don't compromise it just because it's convenient for someone else. If we did that, then we wouldn't get anything done, and our kids would be hurting. And it goes with that. For example, like, I'm a big proponent of bilingual education, right? It's something that, thankfully, federally, is something that is now in place, that our bilingual students have access to bilingual education. And so because I know that, I'm not going to compromise my beliefs when someone says, this dual language program is how do we know if it's effective? Maybe it shouldn't exist. Or
Right.
I could be like, yeah, this is the time where, right, when you listen, but this is the time when you engage, and you engage in a way where it's educational. When you're there to also help other people understand what our students. And so making sure that what you've learned, what you've been trained in, what you just experienced through life, what is best for our kids, don't get put on the back burner just because someone else thinks it's inconvenient, or it's not appropriate. We have to be the spokespeople for our kids, and sometimes it's okay to disagree. I know that's hard for teams to do, but one of the things that we did for one of my teams this school year is to say, it's okay, we're not all going to agree, and that's all right. So check yourselves. All right. The moment you're disagreeing, all right, we know we're going to disagree. That doesn't mean we can't get along or it's personal.
Right.
It's just that we don't agree because we see things in a different lens. And with that too, is sometimes it's okay to say no. Something that a school administrator, there's just so much that we have to say yes to. And there's times where I've had to say, you know what? No, I don't think this is the appropriate time for this. Or no, I don't think that meeting should be held at this moment in time. We need more X, Y, and Z. Or no, we will not have that student change school, change programs in the middle of their program. So sometimes it's okay to say no, although it might not make people happy. We can't compromise what we know about our kids and what works for them.
Yeah, you're hitting on something here. I'm actually listening to a book right now on Audible. It's called Your Perfect Right, and it's about living a life of assertiveness. And in the book, they actually just referenced another book called Assertive Women that talks about that additional layer that women deal with when they attempt to be assertive, and it's written off as being aggressive, or even some language that I personally don't use, right? She's this, right? And that assertiveness piece, right? And so Lisette and I talk about that quite often, about something that may be seen as me being assertive is viewed differently, if she does it. So, but I mentioned that because this idea of assertiveness, and I want to give these people their due. So I'm going to call out their name.
Yeah.
The book is Your Perfect Right, Assertiveness and Equality in Your Life Relationships by Dr. Robert Alberti and Dr. Michael Emmons. Book was originally published. Yeah. Book was originally published back in the 70s. This is the 10th edition. But one of the things that they talk about is that assertiveness is really based on the idea that everybody is equal. And sometimes we think about, okay, well, I don't think that anybody is better than me. But do we ever get stuck in the trap of, do I think I'm better than somebody else, right? And so now all of a sudden when we're disagreeing, if I think I'm better than you, that's where I start getting into my emotions. What do you even know? What are you talking about? You know, obviously my idea is better, but that ability to say, no, I'm not going to compromise because I don't think you're better than me. But I also don't necessarily need you to move off of where you're at because I don't think that I'm better than you. So now what? What do we do to maybe take our two ideas and actually create an idea that's better than what either of us had alone, right?
Yeah.
Man, just again, I recommend the book. I think that what you're saying here, don't compromise, right? Don't be afraid to disagree. Don't be afraid to say no, because that is your right. You have the right to say, no, I'm not doing that. You know?
And even just saying that, we always like hesitate, right? Like, but you're so right. And, you know, just want to add something on top of what you said. You know, it is so true. And I work with majority of women, right? In our field, it's majority women that are educators, but that is something that I feel that all of us need to continue to grow in is being able to set differences aside and bring to the table what is gonna help our mission. And then kind of put ourselves, our egos, our prides, we gotta leave that at the door and just think about, why are we here? Let's focus on that. And so that is one thing, like I said, I'm still growing in that area. Trust me, there's days where I just want to be like, you have no idea what you're saying.
Thank you, yo, yes.
But again, like this also makes you be the light in your school, makes you walk in confidence,
Right.
makes you have a gratitude for maybe things that you are not that strong in, or aspects of the education world that you may not be strong with. And then it also makes you just something that engaged, right? So it all ties up. All these 5 tips all ties up. And I think that's what these 5 are transforming to my life as an administrator, as an educator as well.
Yeah, no, I love it. You know, it made me think, just there's a part of the song from the musical Hamilton, right? He says, why does he always think he's the smartest in the room, right? And I've taken that with me, and unfortunately, what I have dealt with at times is, as a well-spoken Black man in education, who is then also bilingual.
Wow. Yeah.
There are times where I am treated as someone who is exceptional. And then that gets into my mind and I start to believe it. And so I've had to sit and pull myself back. I'm like, dude, you're not the smartest person in the room. We are the smartest, because all of us together are going to produce more than you can, bro. And so just be still sometimes, listen sometimes, be grateful. And so again, all of this, like I said, I'm going to throw this up on our Twitter because I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today. And again, feel like, man, I've learned something for sure. So, Sandy, we thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of Black, Brown, and Bilingual. We have a tradition here that before we allow our guests to depart and get on with the rest of their day, we ask you to share this. If there is one thing that you want the listeners of this podcast episode to walk away with, like what would that one thing be for them to walk away and be like, you know what, it was worth it because I heard that?
Ooh, this is a good question. I'm on the spot now. I think what just summarizes all of these 5 points is you can only control you, so be the change. I would say that's what's coming to my mind right now.
Yeah.
We can't force someone to be grateful. We can't force someone to shut up. We can't force someone to be humble. Can't force someone to own up. But we can do that for ourselves. So it starts with you. It starts with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in shining that light, you give permission to others to shine their light as well. Sandy, thank you so much again for being on Black, Brown, and Bilingual. I know that you are actively working as an educator. So I wish you the best of luck with the rest of the school year as we have to go back on Monday. I know, I always think on Mondays, like, maybe I'll take this one off, but we got to go back. Let's go back. Let's continue the work, and let's go on to excellence. So thank you so much for being on Black, Brown, and Bilingual, and we hope that you have a great rest of the school year.
Thank you, and same to you. I just want to say thank you for creating this platform, for giving people like me a voice. I commend all the work that you are doing, and I'm so grateful that people like you are, and like Lizette too, shout out to her, are doing this for us educators that are Black, Brown, and Bilingual.
If you liked this episode, don't forget, we've got shorts too. Like, not that we're wearing them, but the videos, shorts.